Now, the SA Blackout Report by BrandMapp-Silverstone suggests that South Africa's middle class is pessimistic about the country's future, while 8020's most recent credit stress report highlights that the middle class is drowning in debt. How is this group of people likely to vote in the upcoming election? Owen Skae, who's director of Rhodes Business School, and development economist Phelisa Nkomo join us with their analysis. Owen, we just have you for now. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for chatting to us.
Good afternoon, Nalatanda. Good to be with you. Thanks.
Brilliant, Owen. Thank you for chatting to us. I mean, if I just want to reflect on South Africa's middle class, so post-1994, there was a boom of a middle class in South Africa of all races from different walks of life. That's changed quite a bit, over the last few years. Owen, I'm keen to get your thoughts on that trajectory.
Yeah, so clearly the middle class contributes a huge amount to the economy, and when one considers that for the budget the highest proportion comes from personal taxes, it's really important that the government recognizes that if the middle class, however we define that, and people tend to suggest that it's around a monthly income of say 25,000 rand, that if they continue to be stretched, it's going to be very difficult into the future. And of course, politicians are making a lot of promises at the moment. Many people perceive those to be empty promises. So we'll have to see on the 29th of this month whether those promises hold true.
One thing we do know is that there's obviously a direct correlation here between economic growth and the prosperity, the maintenance, the preservation, and the emergence of middle-class people in any economy. Here in South Africa, we've had, less than desirable growth, and I'm wondering if that has, caused the middle-class story in South Africa to really change, and that's something that will be on the minds of middle-class South Africans as they look to vote.
Yeah, look, because we're speaking specifically about the middle class, we clearly can't ignore all the other people in our society who are also struggling. But specifically with the middle class, they really feel that they're getting squeezed at the moment. And I think that part of the challenge is that in the last budget, the minister did not make provision for inflation, bracket creep, fiscal drag. So that seemed to be disingenuous. And the middle class is having to pay additional amounts for private security, for medical aid. And then when the municipalities are failing and they're not rendering service delivery and the middle class is paying their rates and taxes, it becomes very tempting to think that there might be a tax revolt or a rates revolt. And I'm certainly not advocating for that, but it's at the limit. And I think that really what they want to see now, in the midst of load shedding, in the midst of uncertainty regarding national insurance, that the government really delivers, whoever the government is going to be, whether it's a coalition government or not, they have to now fundamentally deliver, so that we know that when our children go to school, they're being properly educated, that when we drive there, that our tires are not getting burst by potholes, that crime is not digging copper out of the ground, and that we don't have access to electricity for many, many days. So it's really now bread and butter issues that we're going to be voting on.
Thank you for that, Owen. And Phelisa, I'd like to welcome you to this conversation. And Owen and I just reflecting really on some of the issues that will be top of mind of South Africa's middle class as we head into this election. Keen to bring you on this one.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that there are other dynamics, by the way, that are related to what the middle class is going to be looking for. For instance, I know that Black families, right, who are single-headed households, who have to actually start looking for either younger siblings who have no work opportunities. It means that the very income that they're earning gets eroded because they have to support their siblings and other extended family members. So what middle class get to really carry when the economy is not growing is that it actually becomes a buffer, but that buffering has to be created by government. But in this context is that we don't really have the strong buffer. So it means that almost every middle class family has to support a young person who's unemployed, but who's actually educated, who's actually ready to work, but the opportunities are not available. That's the first thing. I share exactly the same sentiment around access to, for instance, proper healthcare, right? Access to water and access to service, but also the electricity. Because at the heart of what also middle class are doing, they're not only workers in terms of the role they play in the economy, but also they create businesses, even if it's a small, medium enterprise businesses, right? And they earn an income. But the reality is that if, for instance, government, the enablers, if government is not building very strong enablers to facilitate that effective participation in the economy, is actually going problematic. In fact, the reason why it's important at this point is that we've seen post-COVID is that a lot of people now rely on multiple income streams. And part of it has to do with the fact that we've realized that firstly, the economy, the global economy itself is subdued. South African economy has really been struggling as well. I mean, we are going to be growing at 0.6%. So what the middle class is going to be looking at is what is a clear economic recovery plan post-COVID, a very strong one that the South African government is presenting to. The last point I want to make is that we just saw a few days ago that there's been an ease on inflation, but the ease is 0.3%. It's very low already on an economy that is choking. Now, under my circumstances, middle class people are groups that do two things in the economy. One, they do savings. The second one is that they actually activate demand in the economy in a form of buying durable goods. But as soon as we have higher inflation rate, it means that they don't spend a lot more and they keep their money. Now, in the South African context as well, there are even gender dynamics, there are racial dynamics, there are economic inclusion issues, etc. So in essence, it makes things actually even more difficult for middle class to really play that effective role in the economy, which actually Anna Muscam says they should really be playing. And I mean, I think that several people who are working in South Africa now are starting to read the manifestos of different political parties to see what different political parties are really offering in a way that would actually satisfy this group that is meant to be a buffer and that helps to the economy to be more resilient going forward.
Thank you for that, Phelisa. Oh no, I want to bring you back here because I think Phelisa made a very, very specific, reference here to issues of race relations in South Africa. And I think it's something that sometimes we seem to be singing out of the same hymn book about, but it's often not quite here. But we do have, of course, within the middle class, all these different inequalities, race, gender, just class as a whole within the middle class here. And it does also then speak to the fact that our priorities as a middle class may also be divergent, and I'm wondering, if that is something that the political can respond to, or if that might take a little bit more organizing between the ordinary middle class people to form single voices and maybe to even, have better conversations about cohesiveness within South Africa's economy.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that we have to acknowledge that legacy issues still prevail in our society and access to certain things like education. The missing middle, a lot of those students come from middle class families, and they're the ones that also get left out in the equation. And therefore, when we talk about entrepreneurship, a very valid point, and removing the barriers to entry, it's critical that the government, my frank opinion is that they continue to pay lip service to all of this. There's never been the real intent to remove the barriers. And of course, when you're facing disagreements around how we're going to get to where we need to go, even though the middle class is essentially united in wanting the same thing, we want our children to go to the best education, we want them to go to the best health service, etc. We want to all be safe. We're united in that. But what can happen is that making empty promises by politicians who themselves thrive on rhetoric and sloganeering and not really addressing the essence of a proper policy around how we're going to address load shedding can cause a split in our society. And that's not really what is conducive. So what we do see, though, is that civil society is mobilizing, regardless of your background. that we have to only look at the e-toll, for example, to see that even the unions and the private sector were aligned in terms of that, because we're all looking for value for money. We're looking to see that the country moves forward, and that ultimately those dire statistics that we saw recently, where the government has poured billions into state-owned enterprises and has received a dividend of 1 million rand from the forestry state company. As a taxpayer, we recognize that SARS is doing a tremendous job at collecting taxes. That is undeniable, and they've turned SARS around. But now it's not just about collecting, it's about actually making sure that our hard-earned money is put to good use in the execution. And I think in the end, we will find that there's sufficient goodwill amongst all of us that we will aim to hold our politicians to account.
Thank you for that, Owen. Phelisa, I want to bring you in here, making mention also of some of the points that Owen has made here, and I think you've also raised them as South Africa's middle class possibly feeling overtaxed, underserved, but also really straddling a very precarious line when it comes to being aware of being privileged, and that's the fact no matter where you sit in terms of being a middle class South African here. And as we head into this election, trying to hear what politicians are really saying about really being able to, make sense of these intersectionalities, and then being able to chart a way forward, which does, of course, think about the fact that we still are a highly unequal society, and that we are very aware of what the dangers of where inequality is and is going.
Yes, I mean, one of the key things I think for me, normally elections allow us to do is to really be able to find a consensus on what we see as being a priority. It's that unfortunately in South Africa is that we've not really had that national conversation. I mean, I know there are policy documents like the National Development Plan, which kind of like really guides in terms of what is it that we should be achieving. But obviously it has a lot of people that is really contested on what should it be prioritizing. And that's why we're experiencing some of the misnomer. That's the first. I think the second issue for me as well, it's the issue around allocation of resources. So what's been happening is that our macroeconomic policy does not even support the thriving of the middle class. In fact, as a heterodox economy, I mean, one of the key things, we rebut the fact that actually South Africa is a middle class. We call it a middle strata because all of the people who will be classified as middle class are just credit-worthy people. They have access to income, but they have no assets. Because if you talk about middle class, it should be people who own a piece of land, who have a farm there, and who have who own their house. I mean, most of all our houses are bonded, and they're over a period of 20 years. And so obviously the key issue as well, we start to even think about is whether government is truly committed in creating a true vibrant middle class in as far as how it protects the financial sector. Because government by now should have long been able to sit on the table and say, if you lock South Africans with a history of racial discrimination, you lock them into a 20-year contract of a bandit house, it means that they would never be able to do anything else, knowing very well that even the majority of South Africans would then have to support extended family members. My siblings are not extended family members. They are my family members. Mm-hmm. My aunt, my sister's aunt extended family members. They're my family members. And then you also then look at the fact that the taxation system doesn't recognize that I actually need to support my mother, right? And all the other people who are sitting, in your balance sheet. So on average, a black person and a black woman supports between 6 to 7 people, within, because you have to buy in the shoes, they help with the registration of fees, there's forever requests for money. And the tax system doesn't look at that. And part of it has to do with, fundamentally, is that the lifestyle of black people is actually not integrated in the mainstream. In fact, we're not seeing, so the work we do at family level to support families is not recognized by policy. I think the third issue, and I know that this might not be for these elections, but I think it's a conversation that must really continue, right? So that we talk about the double taxation that black people are subjected into. And obviously the third issue, I agree around the fact that middle class wants an economy that's working. But also there's always an opportunity, by the way. when your GDP is growing at less than 2%, consistently, which is what we've seen in South Africa, the opportunity is to build for the bottom. Now, if we had an organized middle class, amongst the key things that middle class people normally do is the ability to create and build the economy for the bottom. But because there's polarization in thinking and where this economy is getting into, and fundamental as well, the fact that we still do experience, those unintended consequences of racial discrimination. In terms of the law, certain things are very clear that I enjoy this right and this right and this right. But I know that if I walk into a bank today and say, this is who I am, I'm a development economist, these are the degrees that I have, I would really like to get money. Then I'm asked for collateralization, etc., etc. And we do think that as long as we also still have that type of mistrust amongst Black people. So in essence, and I still make the point that elections are an opportunity to really have the common agenda. But unfortunately, then the common agenda gets exploited by political parties. I don't think that even post-elections, the conversation, the timing of the conversation would have ended. I still do think that for this country to go forward is for Black people, it's for South Africans to say, where do we want to build this country into? What type of support should we be provided in? Because we do know that, for example, white people in this country received massive support, and we also need similar support. And so that we don't approach the progress of this country from a division, but also it must be from a unity. And that support must come from government.
Well, that's all we have time for this afternoon. I'd like to thank you both for this, and I'm keen to revisit this conversation as we see policy emerge post the May 29th. Thank you both so much. That was Owen Skae. He's director of Rhodes Business School, and development economist Phelisa Nkomo.